Hello, everybody. Welcome, John Frost, AM. It's been a long time since I've seen you in the
I
flesh.
know, it is too long. Sure.
So
Yeah.
your name, of course, is absolutely synonymous with large-scale commercial musicals, such as the Tony Award-winning The King and I, My Fair Lady, right through to Wicked and the Producers. And, of course, there have been some terrific productions of theatre along the way, such as Driving Miss Daisy. Now, as I was looking at some of them, I thought, God, your achievements are so very long and illustrious. I think there's in excess of something like 200 productions. Does that make you feel tired? Probably does.
Well, it does sometimes. And as you get older, you just want to keep hanging around to do another 200. So,
but that's great. That's good. Well, we want to see the next 200. So I thought, trying to list them all would take up far too much time, so we won't. But before the big musicals, nationally and internationally, there was a John Frost making his way in the theatre in all sorts of ways here in the Australia of the 60s, 70s and the 80s. Now, I know that you've done just about every job in the theatre going, except, I think, acting, although there might be a secret stage appearance that you actually made at some point, and maybe we might find out about that. But
I was in an amateur version of Showboat in the chorus in Adelaide, when I was really young, really young, still at school. And the stage manager the director at the end of the first dress rehearsal said, I think you would be better backstage than on stage. And so I became an ASM.
But is that your earliest memory of the theatre, or have you got earlier memories?
Yeah, no, the first show I ever saw was a musical that J.C. Williamson's produced in the 60s called The Great Waltz. And that then led me to, I fell in love with live theatre, and it was a big, glorious J.C. Williamson musical. And then I discovered Her Majesty's Theatre in Adelaide, and I then went on and saw Jill Perryman do Funny Girl, Nancy Hayes do Sweet Charity, Tony Lamond do Oliver. And I was sort of besotted. And then academically, I hated school and school hated me. And so I left school at 15 and I got a job with J.C. Williamson's as a stagehand on a big musical called Mame. This is about 1968, I think, August 68. Wow. And I was a dresser, got a job as a dresser. And basically, when the show finished in Adelaide after 5 weeks, it went on to Perth, Brisbane and Sydney. So I just followed the company around the country and picked up a job in each city with the show as a dresser.
One thing I wanted to ask, what did your parents think of you just running off to the circus?
Well, they were absolutely terrific about it, because I used to do a lot of backyard shows and concerts, and so it was always in my blood. And they knew, and I just said to them that, look, I wanted to go on tour with J.C. Williamson's. And in those days, everybody went by train. We went by train to Perth and to Brisbane and all of that. And they came down and gave me $5 because they were very poor, my family, and gave me a hug, and off I went on the road with JCW. I think I was always determined to be in the business, and I could never understand kids my age saying, oh, when I leave school, I don't know what I want to do. I could never understand that. So I was sort of like always determined to do it and just get on with it, and along the way, I was lucky because, Googie and John became lifelong friends, and I worked with them 3 or 4 times in different things. I've been lucky enough to work with, great people, Angela Lansbury, James Earl Jones, Julie Andrews, Debbie Reynolds, lots of Americans and English people, and Derek Jacobi I toured with, doing Hamlet when he came out here when I was with the Elizabethan Theatre Trust. And so the Dance Theatre of Harlem, Duke Ellington, you name it. So it's like I've been blessed in a way that I got all that glamour thing too as I went with it. The big thing too was going into business with Ashley Gordon to set up the Gordon Frost organisation. And that was a big that was a big gamble because we absolutely had no money. I had my holiday pay from Kinsella's, and actually had saved about $3,000. And we took the lease on at the Footbridge Theatre, and we just lied our way through it all.
Let's go on to Marion Street, because Marion Street was founded by Alexander Archdale back in another century, where we all come from, strangely enough. In the current Marion Street,
I would say I wish I was back there.
I'm going to ask you questions about that in a second too, about the then, the now, and where to. But the first production in the Marion Street Theatre that we now know was Romeo and Juliet in 1966. And for the next few decades, Marion Street Theatre became one of the most important companies in Sydney producing theatre. And for some time, you spent some of your years there at Marion Street. So I was going to ask you, how did you start there, and how long were you there? And what were the roles you actually undertook while you were there?
Well, I was an agent at Shanahan Management. And as I said, I hated being an agent. I wasn't very good at it. Anyway, so I got the sack from there, a mutual sacking from Bill Shanahan and myself. And John Milson called me out of the blue, who was the artistic director of Marion Street, and said, we're looking for a general manager to run the theatre. Now, I'd never run a theatre before, had no idea. I'd been to Marion Street and seen a couple of shows there, so I was sort of familiar with it. And I said, yes, love to do it.
What year is this, John?
So this must have been about 81 or something like that, I think. And John Milson was artistic director and having a pretty tough time with it. And Noel Ferrier came in, the wonderful Noel Ferrier, and I got him on the board. And Noel and I sort of shook it up a bit. And then he brought Peter de Berenger on board and all of that. So we had to find a new artistic director. So I artistic directed, I think, 3 shows there. One was Imports of Being Earnest with Patricia Kennedy, and we were doing another one, a new Australian play by a man called George Coppin, who was a famous Australian impresario that Noel was going to... Anyway, that never happened for whatever reason. And then we got John Crummell joined as artistic director. And I was very nervous about John Crummell coming on board because, knowing John, he could be a little erratic. But in fact, it was the best thing that happened. He came on board. We got on like a house on fire. He listened to my suggestions creatively and vice versa. And we sort of ran it together, and it was a really good team. And he was him, he was a fire, he was wonderful. And he got the place back on its feet and making money and paid off the debts. And between us, we had a lot of laughs, and it was fantastic. He was very in tune with what was happening in the West End and in New York. And in those days, the state theatre companies, being Sydney Theatre Company or Belvoir or Melbourne Theatre Company, weren't necessarily doing the sort of plays that Marion Street did. So there was an opening for that sort of play out there. And, if somebody from the council came in, he'd pounce on them and, tell them that the stage is not big enough, or the auditorium's not big enough. You need more seats to make it work financially. And always he lived and breathed the place.
Well, as we know, Marion Street's been sort of sitting there pretty dormant for quite some time now. And I believe now the council has agreed to actually spend some money and actually, renovating it and getting it back up to sort of like, back to an operational and safe mode. And these days, of course, safety is everything. I also remember the John Crummell's Marion Street, it wouldn't have passed any risk assessment, I don't think. Because
in those days.
No, in those days. But what do you think? I mean, going forward, given that there is going to be a space there, obviously Marion Street was successful in those days because it found a niche, that other theatre and other performance companies were not doing in Sydney. What do you think Marion Street, how do you think Marion Street could be successful in the coming years when the refurbishment is completed? You might not know what that refurbishment is.
No, I know. I haven't been brought up to speed at all. But my biggest, I think, when I originally got involved or was showing an interest, as it was the capacity of the building, the seating capacity, which is, it has to be a decent size to make it financially viable. The other thing is that if the Ku-ring-gai Council want this to happen, it's not about writing a cheque. Yes, they write one cheque and they give it to you and you finish the building and all that, but it's an ongoing funding situation.
More. But what are you working on now?
So what I'm working on now, currently this year I'm touring a play with Robin Nevin called A German Life, which we open in Brisbane next week. That's a one-woman show. I'm co-producing with Opera Australia Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, which opens at the Capitol in November. And then next February at the Capitol, I'm doing 9 to 5, the musical. In between that, I've commissioned 1, 2, 3 new musicals, Australian musicals, that I'm working on slowly. I'm quite enjoying that sort of work in creating new things now.
It would be wonderful if you did a workshop development period or whatever in that process at the new Marion Street. That it actually happened.
Yeah, well, that's possible, definitely.
John, that was my final suggestion, that you could reconnect with Marion Street, maybe in this these plans you've got to keep going to 104. There might be a way that you could do that.
No, that'd be fantastic, and I just hope. Look, I want everybody to know that I'm here, I'm around, and if there's anything I can do and help with your fundraising or knocking on some doors of people and all of that to try and get this building reopened, I'm at your disposal. So use me if you want, and there's a bit of knowledge over the years.
I'm sure they will. I mean, the wonderful thing about John, and just to describe you, I mean, the fact is you're like all great people working in the theatre. You're generous, you're resilient, you're frank, you're honest, you get your hands dirty, and you've got momentum. So I'd really like to thank you for spending time with us this morning.